Welcome to episode 11 of Quiltside Chats, brought to you by American Quilt Study Group. The American Quilt Study Group establishes and promotes the highest standards for interdisciplinary quilt-related studies, providing opportunities for study, research, and the publication of works that advance the knowledge of quilts and related subjects. In partnership with the International Quilt Museum at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. The International Quilt Museum's mission is to build a global collection and audience that celebrate the cultural and artistic significance of quilts. Quiltside Chats are a series of lively conversations between Carolyn Ducey, International Quilt Museum Curator of Collections, and an American Quilt Study Group member, featuring the quilt that she or he would sneak out of the building if it weren't a crime. Lenna DeMarco is a past president of the American Quilt Study Group and is the founder and facilitator of the Arizona Quilt Study Group. She has served on the executive boards of the Arizona Centennial Quilt Project, the Arizona Quilters Hall of Fame, and the Arizona Quilt Documentation Project. With Ann Hodgkins, she co-authored the column Vintage Views on Antique Quilts for Quilting Quarterly magazine. With Ann Hodgkins and Len Miller, she co-authored Follow the Thread, Quilts of the Desert Caballeros, Western Museum. In 2016, she was inducted into the Arizona Quilters Hall of Fame for her work in preserving and promoting quilt history, both nationally and in Arizona. In 2017, she was featured in Quilt Folk magazine. Carolyn Ducey is Curator of Collections at the International Quilt Museum, a position she has held since 1998. She oversees acquisition and management of the IQM collection of more than 8,500 quilts. Ducey earned an MA in American Art History from Indiana University in 1998 and her PhD in Textiles, Clothing, and Design with an emphasis in quilt studies at the University of Nebraska in 2010. She is co-editor of American Quilts in the Industrial Age, 1760 to 1870, published in 2018, and a co-author of What's in a Name? Inscribed Quilts, published in 2012. And now, let's cozy up to the quilt.
Nah, how are
Hi,
you
Carolyn.
today?
How are you?
I'm doing well. It's a hot July day. It's a good time to be sitting here chatting about quilts, isn't it?
It's a hot July day here in Arizona. It's 112.
Yes. Well, it's just been so much fun. We have had such a fun time recently, Lenna, because you were here in Lincoln.
Yeah,
and
it was great.
And your friend Margaret Simmons came and spent a week refolding quilts with us.
It was. I think I lost weight and put, did about 30 miles just running back and forth folding quilts.
Well, I didn't expect that kind of result, but that's good. But it was really fun. And you and Margaret managed to get more than, what would we figure, more than 200 quilts refolded while you were
Well, we had a little help from you too, so it's good. But yeah, we folded a lot. And also what was really interesting was folding the textiles from Central Asia, from Uzbekistan and all that. That was really interesting and a real challenge to learn to fold them.
It's really hard to fold those single layer pieces. The quilts from Central Asia aren't typically quilted, so they only have a single layer, and it's just harder to fold than a quilted piece. It's got a little oomph to it.
Well, it inspired me after we did all that folding to come home and refold my quilts.
Oh, good.
I told Margaret I have to hire her to do that. So we had a great time. We had a good time.
It was super fun, and it was so great to have you here. And we appreciate all you guys' hard work. I mean, that's a lot of work. We don't have the most forgiving floors, and it's a lot of on your feet time. So, but it's also really fun to be able to see all the different quilts that come out of the boxes, because you never know what's going to come out of the next box.
And one of the nice things that I appreciate is that there were 3 quilts that I really wanted to look at and study, and I was able to get to see them up close and personal and measure them and do all sorts of things. And this quilt in particular, I felt so lucky to be able to see the quilt we're going to talk about in person rather than relying on pictures and books and that sort of thing. So that was helpful.
It really does make a difference.
Oh, it does. Yeah.
It's actually really fun because I think a lot of scholars have come out again, having not been able to get to places during COVID. We probably got 6 different scholars that are coming in to use quilts in the collection. And that was really an important thing to Robert and artist James, that people were able to use the collection and that it was really it was alive and being taken out of the boxes and researched. And some of the things we're going to talk about today, I mean, there's just been so much fascinating research done in the last 20 years in quilt history.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Well, it's like what Eileen Tristane always wanted to offer a lecture just about, dating quilts and looking at them closely. And she wanted to call it dating and heavy petting, which I thought was perfect.
It is perfect.
That's what you want to do. You want to touch them. I mean, they're a tactile object. And that's, they just invite you to feel them. Yeah, it's great.
And until you really see the real thing, as much as I do think, virtual offerings are great, you do notice things when you see the quilt itself that you may not pick up in photos. So I guess sometimes photos do that too, because we were looking at photos and how you spot things in photos as well.
Right, yeah. Well, one of the things that we're doing through AQSG, and I know a lot of people are involved in this, is that we started a group called Friends of the Needle. And as I've always been frustrated because quilting is what I love best, the action of quilting. And because it's the only thing I can do. I can't applique or piece worth diddly, but I can quilt. But I've always been frustrated because when you look at books, particularly the older ones, you don't see the quilting. They might say heavily quilted or 6 stitches to the inch, whatever, but they don't talk about it. So that's frustrated me. And so I organized a group called Friends of the Needle. And as Xenia says, we're going to agitate for quilting. So we're trying to get people to be more aware of the quilting, how to document it, what are some resources, and particularly how to photograph it. And your book, Machine Quilts in the Industrial Age, right? Yeah. Is one of the best in terms of photographing the quilting. You can really see it in there. So that's an example that we hold up. But yeah, it's really sad to lose that because, that's, to me, that's what makes a quilt is the quilting.
Yeah. I'm a devotee of the quilting too, but it was really hard when we first started getting our photographs of the collection, because I remember the first time we went to a photographer, and this was when we would have to take the quilts to his studio. He'd build a huge slant board, and he took these beautiful photos. And when they came back, I said, well, the problem is that we can't see the quilting in any of them. And we have to change the lighting. We have to find a way, because that was one of the things we really wanted to do, was to be able to make sure people could see the quilting. And I'd say we're not always 100% able to do that.
Yeah.
It's a tricky thing to photograph quilts so they'll show the quilting. But I'm excited. I hadn't heard about this Friends of the Needle. I'm going to have to join the group because I think it's a whole area we haven't really studied.
No. So, well, we're having a meeting the first day in the afternoon when we get to the seminar. I think Wednesday afternoon we're doing it. I mean, Wednesday evening. So if you're interested, it's on the schedule, and just pop in. And we're just going to kind of review what we've done over the past year and where we want to go forward with it. I mean, we're pretty casual. We're it's nothing real formalized and stuff. So any contributions you want, just, contact me. We'll put you on the list and away we'll go.
Wow, that's a great project. So exciting. All right. Well, we have business today.
Yes, we do.
So tell us about the quilt that you picked out. If you could, if it wasn't a crime, which one would you take home? There's 2 or 3 you'd want to take home, right?
Yeah, well, there's several I would like to take home. I like to take home the entire James collection, but that's not possible. But anyway, when Kathy Cray contacted me about doing this, I was really kind of gobsmacked and flattered because, you've had people like Xenia Cord on here, and, if you want a question answered, you just www.askxenia.com. She knows everything. But I mean, most people know that I really like red and green applique quilts that you can see in back of me, and I have a substantial collection. So Kathy said, well, surely you can find a fabulous, a fabulous quilt in the collection. And I went through all the, online slides and stuff, and they're wonderful. I mean, here's an example of 2 of them that are just fabulous. And, what appeals to me about the red and green applique quilts is not only the skill and craftsmanship that they did, but also just the innovation of these women. You know, there weren't any published patterns. So on the left, you've got pot of flowers, and on the right, you've got a wig rose. But, you know, every quilt you have, they're totally different, totally different. So I really admired the innovation and creativity of these women that created them. And I think it's a real evidence that so many women, how frustrated they were in terms of their abilities to express themselves. So they had their needle, you know, other opportunities weren't there for them. And so, you know, this was their art. This was their way of expressing their creative energies and creative outlets. So they're just fabulous. And the more over the top they are, the better I like them. I mean, like, look at that fabulous border on the quilt on the right. So,
isn't that just ridiculous? I mean, you didn't have to do that to finish that.
No,
you already had a pretty spectacular quilt, and then to add that kind of a border and so many layers to the border, it's just amazing to me.
I know. And people, you know, they always say, well, how long did it take to do that by today's standard? It took a long time, you know, but, you know, whole sense of time was a little bit different than what we do now. If we can't get it done in a day and a half, it just ain't worth it. So, but yeah, they're just fabulous.
Have you ever really figured out about how long you think it would take someone if they were working pretty steadily at making a quilt like this? Because people ask all the time, and I always say, you know, there's so many variables. Who knows?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it just depends on the skill of the quilter and the maker and stuff. So I have no idea. I'm sure the quilt on the left, on the right, took you know, easily a year. I should think easily a year.
Easily.
So, yeah. But I mean, what's amazing is that we have so many red and green quilts that have survived in excellent condition because, you know, they were the best. In many cases, they were the best quilts and got brought out when the minister came and then put back in their storage and stuff. So there's just fabulous ones around. And fortunately, they've been appreciated by even people outside of the quilting community for the last 200 years. But yeah, I keep trying to think I should collect something else too, but I always go to the red and green applique.
You know what you love. So
yes, we do. But anyway, the quilt I chose, if you want to go to the next slide, Tara, is an album quilt created in 1856 by Margaret Huffman. Morton was her married name. Her maiden name. And I just kept coming back to this quilt because I'm not someone who really does a lot of genealogy or that I'm not that big of a collector of album quilts. And it's, you know, I just kept coming back to it, couldn't figure out why. And I looked at other examples and I just kept coming back, but it's a quirky little quilt. And the more you look at it, the more rules you see that Margaret broke in her own way. So anyway, it's a signature quilt. There's 19 signatures. They're all done by different hands. So there wasn't a scrivener used. They're all individual. And the people who signed it appear to be mostly women and family members of Margaret's, her brother and sister-in-laws, a lot of friends. And I was thinking as I looked at them, and you've had your genealogy task force do work on this, so you very graciously sent me what they had found out. Most of these women are about the same age as Margaret, give or take. But so if you could go to the next slide, yeah, there's Margaret's signature right there. The blocks date between 1853 and 1856. And she's living in Preble County, and most of the people who signed it were in that immediate area. So I got to thinking, well, would this have been her church group? Who would these people have been? Margaret's almost 27 when she finishes the quilt. She's not about to get married. We'll talk more about that later on. So it's not necessarily a marriage quilt, but I think it's more of a friendship quilt. So if you can go to the next slide, we'll see where Margaret lived. Okay. Margaret lived in Preble County, which is, you can see it's the green one that's right next to Indiana, right there. Yeah. And that's where most of the signatures come from. And I was talking with Susan Price Collins, you know, who wrote the Circuit Rider's Quilt, which is an album quilt. And that's coming from Drake County, straight up ahead. And catty-cornered to is Miami County, where Sue Cummings did her research in the Miami Valley quilts, which granted are a bit later, but there seems to be there's a precedent for album quilts here. So it's a familiar form, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And then one of the things that I started thinking about is right across from Preble County is Montgomery County. And in Dayton is the Montgomery County Female Academy Seminary. So it's possible that maybe, oh, thank you. It's possible that Margaret and her friends went to this female seminary because her father was well-to-do. I mean, pretty well off. He had quite a bit of money and a farmer. So she had the opportunity to do this. So these may have been her schoolgirl classmates.
Oh, yeah.
And so that's a possibility. I can't find any evidence that she necessarily did it, but that's something I've been thinking about. So if you could go to the next slide, Tara. Yeah. One of the things that interests me was the fact that probably if she did go to some kind of dame school or female school, she probably was taught calligraphy, how to sign quilts. And you can see her name there, and it's surrounded by, nice vine, feathered vine or laurel leaf vines. And I have a little piece of ephemera that I got off eBay, which I just love, and it's on the right. And apparently it's an instruction from a teacher on doing this. And it's a little hard to read. I have to put on my glasses for this. But Tara, can you pull in on that little picture frame there? Yeah, there we go. Oh, thank you. Very well done. She says at the top,
so cool.
The teacher says, I would like for you to draw half, and then something I can't make out, of each of these two patterns. The rest I leave to your fancy. And the little pattern on the right, on the left says friendship, or no, family, and the one on the right says friendship. And below are three mottos. "'Tis friendship stamps the value." And number 2, it says, "May virtue be thy guide and fortune smile on thee." And the third one is dedicated to friendship. And underneath, the teacher says, "Please make some of these mottos." And mottos is in possessive. But you can see the similarity between Margaret's signature block and these in here. So I'm sure she was somehow trained in the needle. I mean, the pen. You can see the two together.
Well, and what do you think they would have used these for? Do you think this was specific to quilting, or was this maybe some kind of a what do they call them, a carte de visite, or some kind of a?
Well, I was thinking about that as I was looking at it, and I have a lot of friendship albums from the 1830s and 1840s, and on down, and I have some common books and stuff, and I don't see anything in any of them that looks like the two little logos there. Only place I see those is on quilts. Now, I may be wrong, and I haven't done extensive research, and if anybody knows anything, that could support or indicate or whatever with this quilt. But yeah, I think this was for fabric marking, because you tend to see something like this on many, many album quilts, signature quilts. So, they taught needlework and different things. So possibly this was part of it.
Yeah.
Don't know, but yeah, I can't believe I found this little goodie.
It's so charming.
Yeah, I paid enough for it, let me tell you, but I wasn't going to let it go, by gum.
Well, it's so interesting to see a teacher and giving instruction like that. I've never seen anything like that.
No, I haven't either. And unfortunately, that stuff just probably got tossed. I mean, because a lot of the common books and the signature books were done very nicely. I mean, I have one book that apparently was copied over in very nice handwriting, everything, all the stuff. So I'm sure they wanted to just do their best, put their best foot forward. So the fact that this little scrap of paper survived is pretty amazing,
It is. It's really amazing.
It was folded up and stuck in something, as you can see. But anyway, so we can go back to the next slide, which is the full quilt, and maybe talk a little bit about the history of this quilt. It is it's 100 by 80 and a half, so it's somewhat big, not huge, but pretty big. And it's got kind of a typical and yet sad story behind it. So I think it's helpful to see what the story is about it. As we said, most of the blocks are signed by friends and some family members, and it's made between 1853 and 1855. So she could have been working on it as part of her future dowry. The fact that was born in 29 means she's almost 27 when she finishes this quilt. She finishes it in March. And this is where everything gets kind of interesting. I'm sorry, I have to refer to my notes on this because it's long. In September of 1856, so that's just a couple months after she finishes the quilt, she marries Nathaniel Huffman. And Huffman is a widower. This is where it gets kind of odd. So she finishes the quilt 6 months before her marriage. Now, there's nothing wrong with marrying a widower, but Nathaniel's wife had only died about a year ago. And he does have children. So you think, okay, he wants to get someone who's a mother. I can, have her right away. She was probably living with her parents, with her brother or sister, because her parents had died quite a few years earlier. So she's kind of that spinster aunt, and they maybe wanted to get her off their hands for something, because she's pushing 30. She's about 27 years old. So you think, okay, he needs to have a mother for his children. But he has 3 children. 2 of them are teenage girls, 16 and 14. Then he has a 5-year-old son. Well, unfortunately, so they're both kind of marriageable age, and they could take care of the little boy, and they could keep house. But the oldest one, Phoebe, who's 16, she dies in January. So she dies before the marriage. So he has 2 daughters. So he really doesn't have a whole lot of time to mourn and to mourn his wife and then to court Margaret. So I'm thinking he probably knew her. He probably knew who she was in the community, so was familiar. And it may have just been a marriage of convenience for them both, but which isn't really that unusual. But they are married for 24 years. They live a long time. But the sad thing is that all of Nathaniel's children pass away before him. I said, no, one of the girls doesn't. The second girl, who was 14, she actually marries a fellow, and they live next door to Margaret and Nathaniel. But her husband is killed in Civil War, which isn't too long from when this quilt was made. And then she dies when she's 43.
Wow.
I know. Margaret and Nathaniel, as I said, are married for 24 years. And all of her children, they have like 5 kids, all of them save one die before Margaret does. And Margaret spends her last years with Anna, her youngest daughter. Anna is, again, she's the spinster. She never marries. She takes care of her mother. She works in the last half of the 19th century. She works at the government printing office. And eventually they move to Washington, D.C., where Margaret dies in 1920 at the age of 91. And Anna dies 4 years later in 1924. So the question is, where was this quilt? Who had it? It's in pristine condition. Did it stay with Margaret? Did it go to one of the kids? Did Anna keep it? I can't find anything in the James record, if they bought it from a family member. So I'm not really sure about that. But it's remarkable that it has survived this long. And it has a sad story behind it, even though it's a very pretty quilt. So that's the story of Margaret and Nathaniel and the quilt.
And how fascinating to think that she and her daughter moved to Washington, D.C. for what it sounds like for a job.
Yeah. She worked in the government printing office. At first, she worked like a binder there in Ohio, and then she moved to D.C. I'm not exactly sure what it was that she was doing, but it was the government printing office. But, at this time, teens and 20s, women were working. They were in the field, and life had really changed. If you watch Downton Abbey, you know that.
It's true.
But she did. She was the youngest of them all, and she took care of her mother, which sometimes is what happens. The youngest kid is designated as the caretaker, unfortunately.
Right. Well, and how sad that she lost so many of her children.
I know. Yeah.
Lifetime.
Yeah. And, they were farmers, so there was hard work, and they all were gone. She lost all of them, including Nathaniel's children too. So that's
And
really, really
when did
sad.
Nathaniel die? Do you have that?
He died. Let's see, when did Nathaniel die? Nathaniel died in 1880. Yeah, and his one daughter dies in 1885, the one who married the Civil War vet, and she's only 43.
Wow.
And 3 years later, his son dies at the age of 21. So none of his children actually survived very long, which, unfortunately was all too common in the 19th century. A
Yeah.
shame. So if you want to go to the next slide. Okay. So the thing that really fascinated me as I look at that quilt is its layout. And when you think about most album quilts, and classic example is a Baltimore album, you can see it's laid out like a grid, 1, 2, 3, ABC, real straight up and down. Sometimes you will see diagonal ones, and sometimes you'll see sashing like the one on the right. So even if they're fancy like the Baltimore album, or you can do the next slide, Tara. Yeah, or just pretty simple and a little funky, they're still pretty straightforward. But I think the next slide is the whole quilt again. You do that, yeah. If you look at this one, if you look at Margaret's quilt, all of the blocks are on the diagonal, and they're all just kind of floating there in the air.
Yeah.
There's no sashing, but that's I think what really appealed to me is that they're all diagonal, and she's used these funky blocks around the edge, and we'll talk about those to stop the flow of the body of the quilt. So if you want to go to the next close up, the next one. Yeah. What Margaret has done, and I'm thinking Margaret quilted this as it's 10 to 12 stitches per inch. It's pretty consistent all the way through. I didn't really see much difference in the quilting. No matter how good we are, we don't always quilt exactly the same way every day. But she's done something that quilters will sometimes do, people who really love to quilt. And she's used the quilting to create the sashing. And you can see those borders around the block. She's got these cables. So she's created the sashing out of the quilting itself. And next slide. And that's not unusual for quilters to do. And here's one of these issues of trying to photograph quilting, Carolyn. This is done in my family room when I had to open the patio door to get some light. But the center of the quilt is basically like, one piece of fabric. But you can see how the quilt maker has used her quilting to create a series of blocks, repetitive blocks, and sashing. The quilting is done in like a triple row, so she's got a really distinct sashing line there. And then each of the blocks is a quilted flower blossom, a pattern, all the same. So you can imagine this being done in pieced and applique. But she's done.
I've never seen one that's done like that, with the entire center just created with the quilting.
I know. I almost passed this quilt up because I found 2 quilts, red and green quilts, on the floor of an antique store in Arizona. And you never see this stuff in Arizona. If it's 1930, it's an antique. But it was just wadded up, and it's got a lot of fabric loss, as you can see, the blossoms going around the edge. And I thought, do I want this? I thought, well, it's $50. I'll take it. I am so glad I did, because I've never seen that either.
Yeah.
And so as I've done this study of quilting, I'm seeing this kind of creating an illusion with quilting more and more. So you can do the next one, Tara.
It's funny how they kind of find you once you start noticing those things.
It is.
I'm drawn to that so often.
Yeah. And so here's one here. And here's the block, and it looks like it's a circle applique, but if you look closely, you can see that it's on point. Yeah, and you can see the seam there in the upper left particularly. And then what the quilter has done is she's quilted a wreath, a circular wreath around it. So when you step back from the quilt, it looks like you've got these circle blocks.
Wow.
She's created a whole different image in there. So I've got a huge collection now, so I don't need just every red and green going. But so now I'm looking for interesting quilting and fabulous borders and stuff.
I love that. There's just something magical about the texture you get with quilting. I've always just loved quilting, and I love this idea that you've got a whole nother layer of pattern on the quilt.
Exactly. And as I look at some of them, I did a Zoom thing for AQSG, online seminar about a year ago, which was about quilting. And I'm glad I did, because it really challenged me to start looking at the quilts in my collection, because it was COVID, I couldn't get out, and just found some really fascinating things. And I think there's a lot of makers there in the 19th century who like quilting one heck of a lot more than they like the piecing or the applique.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this person right here might have been one of them, because this thing is just quilted all to pieces, and it's beautiful quilting. The applique is okay, it's nothing spectacular, but the quilting is just beautiful, So
it almost looks like she's added more details to the bouquet even.
Yes, yeah.
Quilting.
Yeah, well, she's done a lot of there's a lot of crosshatch applique on here, the decor on it and stuff. So it's an odd little quilt. Those flowers on the side, going out to the side, they always remind me of Foghorn Leghorn or Daffy Duck when he would put the rubber hat on his head. It just, I can't look at it without laughing.
Yeah, they are kind of funky, aren't they?
Yeah, they are.
What you normally see.
Yeah. But that's the wonderful thing about red and green applique quilts, is that they are all totally different. You may think you're looking at the same quilt over and over, but you're not. You're seeing a different interpretation.
It's true.
So let's go to the next one. Okay. And one of the things that really got me, that's unusual, and you and I were talking about this earlier, is this scalloped border.
Really unusual.
Yeah. I mean, you do see now and then scallop borders in this mid-century, not a lot. And when they are, they're fairly small. But these puppies, they're 6.5 inches across. They're biggies. And the binding is very nicely done. There's no wear or tear to it, so it hasn't really been used. I think she may have used a saucer to get that shape or whatever, maybe a compass. But Tara, if you can pull in on the quilting in the center of those little things. Yeah. You would think when you saw this that she probably would have put a feathered wreath in there, something kind of fancy, because the quilt is pretty heavily quilted. But no, she's put this really weird grape pod or grape pods, kind of split down the middle, triangular. And there's only like 3 or 4 grapes on either side. Usually when they did grape pods, whether it's applique or quilted, you had that triangular shape with like 13, 14 grapes in a leaf. But this is pretty skimpy, which surprises me for the rest of the quilt. And I don't know if she just was getting tired, just wanted to get this darn thing done. But it's an odd choice to put in there.
It is odd. And she left a lot of space unquilted, which is
right. Which you don't find in the body of the quilt. And then she's done this, like, it's a little feather along the edge, which is a real common, I call it a utilitarian motif, because you look at some of these quilts and they just need to fill up a space. And so they'll put that little teardrop or feather shaped element in there. And that's what she's used for the whole thing. So we can go to the next one. Next slide. Yeah. So most of the blocks are, they're pretty traditional, familiar style wreaths of the period. They're all pretty much at the same skill level. So I'm thinking, these girls all had pretty similar training, or, a very similar life experience. And it's nice because they seem to have all used the same color palette, not the same fabrics, because we got to look at that, but the color palette is there, that kind of chrome yellow and pink and red together that gives kind of an orangey glow, like you can see in the block on the top there. It's just really sweet and really pretty. But they did some uglier blocks. So you can go to the next one. I think. Tara.
It looks like they're
no, I'm sorry. No, this is
a lot of them. Looks like they're using the same green.
Yes, that is one too. The green was almost always the same, but the other fabrics, they're printed and stuff. So they may have done some things collectively. Yeah. But they're all kind of, some of them are just kind of weird, like this one with the 2 huge fronds and the little bird perched on top. I mean, just dwarfed by these big leaves and stuff, which I really like that one. And then the one on the right, I mean, it looks like she just threw some things in. Is that like mother-in-law's tongue that's coming up there in the middle, that, that plant we all have?
Yeah.
But that's totally an original, and it looks like she's taken motifs from different blocks and put them all together. But it's nicely done. You know, the work is nicely done, nicely appliqued. But then we do have some other ones that aren't quite so quite so well done. The one on the right is more my style. Just get this damn thing done.
She did kind of just chop it off a little there, didn't she?
Yeah, exactly. A little simple thing. But the thing that really is odd, and that it took me a while to realize what was going on, and we can go back to the next quilt, next slide, Tara. If you look around the edge of the body of the quilt, you can see she's got a nice kind of like straight edge that stops the flow of the design, everything. But she's like whacked blocks in half. She just cut these things up and stuck them in the corners and stuck them on the edge. Yeah. So
you think did she actually make a block and cut it in half? Or did she just
go to the next slide? I think we can see the next slide, Tara.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean the one on the right, I'm on the left. I'm sorry, I'm dance teacher, so right and left is switched. So yeah, you can see this is kind of like a poinsettia. And she just sliced that puppy down the middle. That would be darn hard to piece that deliberately.
Yeah.
I think she just took a block and just cut it and put it in for the little, edge half square triangles. And the same thing on the other block there. That looks like a rose and a reel possibly. And it's just cut straight in half. I mean, why would you applique something like that?
That's
little
very
half.
true.
Yeah,
Maybe
and
there was another quilt being made and they split blocks.
That's the question. It may have been were they orphan blocks? Were they sample blocks? I mean, you've heard about like a quilter's catalog where they would make samples of different blocks, and sometimes they only made half of it because they didn't need to make the whole thing. Okay. But you can. She's talking about pokeberries. Thank you, Terry.
Yeah, Terry recognizes the plants on here. That's fun.
Absolutely. Okay. We can do the next one, Tara. Let's see. And yeah, here's like, is it like a poinsettia or what? And she's just really just cut that puppy up. So, I mean, I don't know if they were blocks people gave her. But the weird thing is you don't see the other half of the blocks in the rest of the quilt.
Yeah.
She just uses one portion of them. And even to this other one on the right, this is a graphic one, more not floral, but just straight lines. And I think it was a whole block that she just cut her up.
It sure looks like. Now, these kind of the geometric or these really I guess geometric blocks on this quilt are kind of unusual. Is that something you've seen on other quilts?
Well, yeah, I think sometimes particularly if the blocks are being contributed to the creation of the quilt, if it's a friendship one. So sometimes, you do see like a variety of style, but also you'll see a geometric in place of in place of the applique blocks. And Kathy, no, none of the half blocks are signed. So
interesting.
Yeah. So I don't know where she got them. You can go back. I think the next slide you can see, Tara. Yeah, and here's some more. This one on the left, you would never applique that like that.
No, yeah, that really does look like it's been just cut down the middle, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I don't even think it's. I think it's like a third of a block or something. And she just really cut it to fit. And I wonder if maybe she had planned to make another sampler quilt and just wanted to get this one done. Because as we said, she finishes it just a couple months before her wedding. So maybe that was the driving force to finish up the quilt.
Yeah.
Mr. Huffman may have asked Margaret to marry him, a week and a half after his wife died. Who knows, because it was pretty quick. Yeah. And then
we see that quite often, don't we? Where a wife dies and leaves children and the man finds another woman to marry pretty quickly. And it is often these women who were a little bit older, who hadn't gotten married, obviously, but they kind of step in to fill that role of mother to those children of the first marriage too, which makes sense. I mean, if you're living on the land, you've got to have somebody outside the home. You've got to have somebody working all the time. You've got to have somebody at home watching the kiddos.
Yeah, and particularly like in Margaret's case, where her parents were dead, So she was obviously living with a brother or sister, and how successful were they? Was she just an extra mouth to feed? Was she raising them? I wish I could find a picture of her, more of her, but I couldn't find anything on Ancestry like that. I did find a picture of Huffman's, of her stepdaughter, the woman whose husband died in the Civil War, and she died afterwards. She was beautiful, just gorgeous, gorgeous woman. So, but nothing on Margaret, unfortunately. No pictures, no added information stuff. But okay, and then we can go to the next one, Tara. I think we're getting down there. Yeah. These are two of the most interesting ones. I'm just wondering if this little block on the left, if that might have been created for that spot. For it, because I can't imagine what the full, maybe it's just a mirror reflection of that block. I've never seen that before.
Mm-mm.
Yeah. And then
that heart-shaped design, that is really unusual.
Yeah. So yeah, it's how it just kind of floats there. So I'm wondering what the other half of that would have been like. Yeah. If that was applique or reverse applique or what, so. But then the one that really cracks me up is the one right next to it, the vine. And Tara, if you can really go in on this quilt, on this block, yeah, you can see with that right there. Yeah, you can see that top vine that's been cut out and pieced in. It's kind of funky. Wow. So I think this might have been a vine border or something that she was planning.
Two different pieces that she's put in there.
Yeah, she just cut it in there, pieced it in there to create this block.
And there's even a few other small little pieces that she's had to add just to get.
Yeah. Yes.
Oh my gosh.
It is a waste not, want not, but the impact and the effect is really interesting. And I don't think I've ever seen a quilt, an album quilt that's done this before.
So yeah, it does make you think about a second quilt, doesn't it? Something else working on, or somebody in the group maybe is working on.
Yeah. So we can go to the, I guess it's our last slide. Okay. And once you've seen all these things, that these are half blocks in there and quarter blocks and stuff, and the fact that they're just floating in there, it's a fascinating little quilt once you look at it. Once you really start looking at it. It's not one that, like I said, it didn't grab it. I didn't really think it was that unusual when I first saw it, but I kept coming back to it. And I just think it's a gorgeous quilt. It
really is. It's really beautiful, but it's just got a different feel to it, doesn't it? It's not just scallop binding, edging, which definitely makes it look a bit different, but it just has it's got a lot of white space, and it's got a lot of really unique patterns to it.
Yeah. And I think that white space and the impact of those blocks just kind of float. Like I said, they appear to just float. Which I really like. And then the fact that down that edge between the blocks, that sharp edge, there's like no piece of piping, no tiny little border to close it all in. They're floating too, and yet they still establish that very strong square there.
Very strong square.
So yeah,
it is interesting that Susan Clement Shears, I'm probably mispronouncing last name, said that the grape motif in the quilted outer border is very similar to that block at the top where you've got the green grapes that are just that kind of line.
Yeah. Can you go? I don't know if you can get up to that, Tara, that little like a wreath block up there at the top. Yeah, I'm assuming they were grapevines. They might have been like pokeberries or something. I'm not sure, but very good, Tara. Look, but. Yeah, so they're just straight down there. But I think, I don't know, is that a grapevine? Are those grape pods, or are they berries like sumac or is it shumac or sumac? Shumac, I think it's shumac. But so that's a question. It's true. Yeah, but you can see that none of the little half blocks have a signature in them, and not all of the applique blocks are signed. So some may have been done by Margaret herself. But they're just really, it's just filled with like surprises. It's just filled with surprises.
Yeah.
Let's see what Susan, could some of the blocks that were cut up have been from the first wife? I don't know, because this was started in 1853, or the blocks were started in 1853, and the quilt was finished. But there's no None of the blocks are signed by any of her husband's family, not his daughters, nobody that's related to him. It appears they're all her friends and all her family. So that's why I think it was done originally just as part of her, her hope chest, her dowry, rather than specifically as a wedding quilt for her marriage to him. It could have,
obviously he wasn't planning on getting remarried in 1853.
Right.
So looks more like a quilt just celebrating all of her friends.
Yeah, exactly. So she would have been like what, 23 when she started. It was still a young woman, and maybe she thought she'd be married very shortly, but it was almost another 4 years before she did marry. So, but
it's just such an interesting design, because if you're doing a quilt on point, you're going to have to fill those half triangles with a design.
Right. Yeah.
But like you said, they just had to have been cut in half. They don't look like a completed design.
No, I think so were they on hand? What was going on? If you look over to the right side of it, you see those about the middle way, you see those 3 posies that are just floating there. But that is a block. I looked at that. I probably should have photographed that, but that is a block, and they're appliqued onto a half square of the cotton, the muslin that's made up of. So I don't know if that was part of a block that didn't get finished, or she appliqued those posies because she was running out of blocks to fill up the sides. But it's an interesting concept, and I've never seen anything like it. I don't know if anybody else has, but if you have, let me know. Let me know.
Did you think, or did you look when you were here, Lenna? Do you feel like the blocks were made by different hands, or was there any indication that they were made by one person or many people?
No, I think they were made by different hands. As you can see, some of them are pretty simple, and the applique is not that well done. That's why I think some of the unsigned ones, and maybe some of the ones that are going down the side, Margaret may have made herself, Margaret and her sisters. But yeah, there is some inconsistency in the skill level. But the ones in the center there, the main ones, they're all done quite well. They're all, like I said, they're all about the same skill level. But I don't think it's all done by Margaret. I think each, as was often done, you made your block, you signed it, and you gave it. Yeah. And as I said, there wasn't a scrivener that came in to do the official signatures and whatever. It's all individual signatures and stuff. So it's definitely a friendship quilt in many ways. So,
yeah. Yes, many different people signing it. I just love that even in this overall, when we're not even all that zoomed in, the quilting still gives such a textural quality to the piece.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it gives it such a weight. It's really stunningly quilted.
Well, I just keep thinking the quilts that are done with trapunto, or when you quilt like single rods real close together, like make it a triple rod and then skip and triple rod, you get this puffy element of the open part in the middle between the rods. And it just invites you to touch. It just invites you to touch it. And so it's a whole other level besides just the visual feast for the eyes or the comfort of the quilt being over top of us. There's this thing of wanting to touch and feel and the tactile element that's come into it. Mm-hmm. And the more I look for that, the more I see. And I've got 2 quilts that you can tell that's what the intent was. They wanted this element in the quilting to rise up and down that pretty much echoed the shape of the blocks, but it's just, you want to touch it. Why else would they do that? I mean, I guess it's easier than trapunto, but
yeah. It's interesting though, as I'm thinking out loud about this, like you said, a quilter who's doing this much quilting obviously loves quilting, and they want that textural effect at the end. And that's what I love. I like to hand quilt, just like you were saying. I like old tops that I can quilt because I like that feeling you get from it. But maybe there's something, where somebody who likes to applique, which is a lot of that hand labor, maybe that's something that ties them to liking quilting, because some of our most beautiful quilting is found in applique quilts of the 19th century.
Oh gosh, yes. Absolutely. I mean, I think, when you had the chintz quilts, this is my theory, and I know I'm going to be blown out of the water, but I think if we didn't have those chintz applique quilts like that came from the South, that it would be hard to get the 4-block appliques here, because they started opening up all that white area for quilting. And so once you get the 4-block appliques that start appearing like, late 1830s, early 1840s and stuff, you've already got a precedent for lots of quilting in white areas. And I think it just kind of exploded from there. I love it. I mean, that's it. I just take my quilts out periodically, unfold it, and just sit there and look at the quilting. And because they're my quilts, I can touch the quilting.
Yes.
Nobody else can, just me.
And do you think that now, obviously piece quilts don't give you the opportunity to lavish quilting on them like that, but do you think the piece quilts generally are less quilted?
Well, if you think about them, they're usually made with lots of, busy fabric. So there's not a lot of white space in them. And so why would you put all that heavy duty quilting on something where you're not going to see it? This solid white background is it's made for the fancy quilting. And what's interesting too is sometimes, you'll see quilters of this period, the 1850s and mid-century, who will quilt right through or add additional quilting to the applique motif, and others won't quilt at all. They won't touch it. So you get this real kind of puffy, unfinished feeling. I like the ones that add the quilting to the applique motif because it makes the motif pop out. But yeah, and then you think when, pieced and repetitive graphics locks started really appearing with any frequency, and it's after the Civil War, and we're much more mobile and women are more involved. So you want something you can take with you to your temperance meeting or suffrage meeting. And these you couldn't do that easily. This is something that demands time and light and concentration. So yeah, I mean, I think of graphic piece quilts as quilts on speed. Just get her done there.
It'll be really fascinating to see what all you come up with when you're really focusing on the quilting, because I do think that just like there's some relationship between the applique designs, so they always are unique, but yet you see, relationships between them, or people that were making basically maybe even trying to make the same pattern, but we're doing it uniquely. Yeah. It'll be really interesting to see how much commonality there is in the quilting designs.
Yeah, exactly. Well, what's really interesting, when I was doing the, working on the presentation, is that we get into the late 19th century. You said it's more pieced. Applique skills have gone by the wayside for the most part. You've got crazy quilts and that sort of stuff. So people aren't doing a lot of quilting. And the next time we really see beautiful quilting patterns and gorgeous quilting is when kit quilts come out. And, kit quilts were supposed to be colonial quilts. Of course, they're copying mid-19th century one. And if you get up close and look at some of these kit quilts, all the way from the teens and 20s, even into the 60s, and when they were still making them, they are gorgeous quilting patterns, just beautiful.
Yeah.
And I did the quilting, follow those blue dots on one of these big cross stitch things. It took me 5 years to finish to quilt it because it was monstrous, but it was gorgeous. I could not have designed that if I tried. And it's unusual that we get, what people called cake mix milk quilts, just add water. But the quilting designs were fabulous. And I'd like to do some research on who actually created those designs and how they got their inspiration and where it came from. Because, I have one that's a trapunto, stuffed work. And from about 1925 or so, the quilting is to die for, and you still had good quilters as well, but it's a stunner. I just can't get over it. So, but it's interesting. Almost another 75 years to get back to nice quilting again. Fabulous quilting.
Maybe it's applique and quilting go hand in hand. Maybe that's one of the things you guys will uncover as you research. So.
Yeah, it could be. So I'm hoping that our friends of the needle who are going to agitate for quilting will find these things. We're going to try to design not a documentation form, but just kind of a checklist of what you look for when you're looking at quilting and what's there, what to look for and stuff. So, and there's so many motifs, so many fabulous motifs.
Yeah.
And, the thing is that I think the vast majority of them were, they were designed by the quilter. You may have had a template, but yet you created your own template in many cases. So, but they're just, yeah, I could talk about quilting all day long. So sorry, Carolyn.
No, I do love it. And that's actually one of the things I plan to. I cannot piece or I like to applique, but that's a lot of work to do a whole
Yeah,
quilt.
it is. Yeah.
But I do have some tops at home that I want to just do the hand quilting on because I love finishing them that way. So I do think that'll be really fun to do, and not something I'm going to put a time frame on because I am very slow. But
well, that's what I do. I mean, I keep thinking, do I need to make quilts? I've got so darn many antique quilts. Do I need to actually make some? So I'm with you. I just get old tops and from basically from the late 19th century and quilt them because it's very satisfying.
It is. It's very satisfying. We had one more comment from Audrey. The motifs that form the border square carry a heavier visual weight than the interior blocks. Could they have been made for an entirely different quilt?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I think there's something like that going on here where there was some kind of other block being made. It would be really interesting because it looks like some of the greens are the same greens. There are a couple of different ones it looks like in the outer border. But yeah, to really spend some time looking and seeing how many of the fabrics that are in the body of the quilt are in that outside edge would be interesting.
Yeah,
but,
and some of the she could have shared some, but some of the people were from Illinois. One of the signers is from Illinois, so she may have brought her own fabric with her. So, but I agree with Audrey. I think those graphic blocks there, you can see I think they were in some cases utilitarian towards this quilt because she needed another block to finish. So why not use that?
Yeah. Well, gosh, it's just such an interesting quilt, and we could just look at this all day and break down all of these different things that are going on in the quilt. But the other thing that I really love about red and green applique, and I've always been just intrigued by it, is how many people seem to love all the little berries, and how many just berries after berries after berries on these red and green appliques. So you see it here in the block on the left side. You see it on the block at the top that we talked about. Just the amount of time and effort that was lavished on these quilts, you can see why they would have been a woman's masterpiece.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think they're made with great love. Great love.
They are made with great love.
Beautiful.
Well, Lenna, thank you so much. This has been a fun discussion, and I love taking time with individual quilts because I think they, we, like you said, we have a lot in the collection. You're refolding. Oftentimes you don't spend a lot of time. You kind of take them for granted. And then when you really start to look and you see all of these interesting elements, it just adds up to so much richer of a story than you imagine when you're not spending the time on it individually. So real quick before we go, we've got about another minute. Tell us a little bit about the quilt behind you, Lenna.
Oh, this I got an estate sale. Actually, it had just come from it at a dealer in Illinois in Springfield. And there's no date on it, but I'm putting it circa 1850-ish. And it's a Whig's rose. And since it's from Illinois and Mr. Lincoln was a Whig when he served in Congress, I'm saying it's for Mr. Lincoln. Of course, it was made much later than when he was in Congress, but that's my story. I'm sticking to it. But it is, it's unusual because it is absolutely mirror image on either side, which I've never seen a red and green applique quilt like this. I think she was a fanatic. I really do. And the quilting is gorgeous and tiny, and there's no mistakes. And
Darn
one of those women.
She makes it hard to live up to.
I know, my gosh. So and it's not very big, so that's good.
Well, all right, we'll give her that then.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, everyone, we're wrapping up today. We are not going to have a Quiltside chat in August. We will be back in September, or I guess October. Maybe not August or September. So we've got Lori Triplet on October 16th coming up, which will be fabulous because I know which quilt we're going to look at with Lori, and I am really excited. It's another applique, but it's a chintz applique. So
cool. I'll be there.
Really fun to see. So please do. Oh, of course, we have AQSG seminar in September. That's why we're not having an event. I'm so excited to get out to San Diego. And I hope everybody's coming out, and we'll say hi when we're out there at the AQSG meeting.
Fabulous.
So it's going to be a little while before we're back to Quiltside Chats, but hopefully we'll see you at seminar. And Lenna, thank you again. And thank you again so much for coming out and giving us so much of your time. You and Margaret were just champs, and you worked really hard while you were here.
Well, keep your eye on that quilt, because when I leave, I may take you up on your offer.
All right, it's a deal.
All right. Thanks,
All right,
Carolyn.
thanks everybody.
Sarah.
Thanks for being here today.
Bye.
Bye-bye now.